Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for being here again. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Justin Golub. I first saw Dr. Golub speak when I was a fellow at Columbia University Age Boom Academy, which is partially to help educate journalists and to give them ideas for writing stories about health-related subjects about aging or subjects about aging. And I think in the cohort that I was in that year, probably more stories were generated and more interest was taken in Dr. Golub's presentation than any other that I saw that year. The subjects struck me then as so important, and the more I've learned about it, the more important it seems, and we'll get into that. A little about Dr. Golub's background. He's an associate professor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at Columbia University, the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, and New York Presbyterian. He has a background in biostatistics and is the author of about 90 peer-reviewed research publications and has co-edited 4 books, including a bestseller among trainees. He's an NIH-funded research program investigating the brain effects of age-related hearing loss and has lectured internationally. And his research has been well reported in places like the New York Times and the Washington Post. And he's also a leading pioneer in minimally invasive endoscopic ear surgery. So with that, I thought we would have a somewhat informal conversation today with Dr. Golub. We have some questions, and hopefully we'll be able to also have time to open it up so everyone can ask their questions. And I thought we'd just start by welcome you and expressing our gratitude for you taking the time with us from your busy schedule. But asking you first, what drew you to study age-related hearing loss and its consequences?
Sure. And thanks, Bruce, for that very nice introduction. I'm excited to be here. So what drew me to study age-related hearing loss and aging? I've always sort of been interested about aging. Our society, for better or worse, perhaps worse, is very youth focused, which seems, if you were going to design a system from scratch, I don't know if that's the right way to design it. That represents just a fraction of the population. And for most of your life, that's in the past. It's not looking forward, it's looking backwards. In terms of hearing loss, my grandfather happened to have a lot of hearing loss, and I was very close with him. He was sort of like a second father figure to me. And as he grew older, he became more and more withdrawn. He was always sort of like the intellectual of the family and sort of the heart of conversation at family meals. And as he got older and his hearing loss got worse, he would just sort of not engage, and he would just sit and sort of look at his soup. And it was very sad. He ultimately got hearing aids, which helped a lot. But that just sort of stood out in my mind as something really impactful. Age-related hearing loss is also incredibly common. Basically, everyone is going to get it. We've done some studies, and other groups have done studies on how common it is. And basically 100% of people will get it if they live long enough. And so if you want to study something that could make an impact, what better study, I haven't finished my cup of coffee. What to better study than something that's going to literally touch everybody on the planet, assuming they live long enough.
Well, that's so is there a working definition for what constitutes hearing loss?
Yes, great question. No, there's not really a clear consensus on what defines hearing loss. So first, let me just take a step back and say that we measure hearing loss typically using this unit called the decibel. In fact, I'll take an even further step back and I'll answer your question by asking a question. How do we define vision? Everybody knows the 20/20 system, right? Everyone's like, they'll say, oh, my vision's 20/30, 20/40. If someone asked you, what's your hearing? Would you have an answer? Probably not. Even if you knew what the decibel is, you wouldn't have a number to express your hearing. And that's very strange to me. We have a simple number that captures vision, but we don't have a simple number that captures hearing. Or rather, there's not good public understanding of a simple number to capture hearing. In reality, we do have a few different ways to measure hearing. The most common thing is something called the pure tone average, which is how loud sound has to be at a few pitches in order for you to hear it. And that's graded from about 0 to 100. And usually around 20, 25 is the generally accepted standard for what is hearing loss. So if it's under 25, your hearing is good. If it's over 25, your hearing is bad, although there's some debate about the exact number. Actually, can I plug something? Let me make sure.
Sure.
For those who are interested, you can go to this wonderful website called hearingnumber.org, hearingnumber.org. And it's a movement through some of my colleagues at Johns Hopkins. I'm actually taking an Amtrak down to Johns Hopkins tonight for a meeting tomorrow there. It's sort of a public health campaign to educate the lay public, the greater public, about this thing called the pure tone average, which they're calling it the hearing number because it sounds a lot less scary than pure tone average. And it's basically the 20/20 system for hearing. It goes from about 0 to 100, where 20 to 25 is the border between normal and abnormal.
Great. And just, I know that there are many causes for hearing loss. Maybe you listened to too much loud music when you were younger or whatever, but is there a known cause for age-related hearing loss?
There is not. We have this hilarious term in medicine called idiopathic, which sounds intelligent. It's not. It's the stupidest term ever. It literally means we don't know what the cause is. So I could smartly answer it's idiopathic, which means we have no idea.
Great. And is it reversible? I take it not. But.
Yeah, not so much. We do. So let me just mention one more layer of detail. So we know a little bit about what causes it. It's due to these little cells in the inner ear that get old and basically die. These cells called hair cells. And then once these cells die off, they don't grow back. And because these cells die, then you lose sensitivity to sound. So things need to be louder to get that same detection in your inner ear and send a signal to the brain. That much we know. However, why that happens, we have no clue. And because we don't really understand the next ring of the onion, we don't have any good medicine currently.
Good. So what are the age-related hearing consequences of hearing loss, particularly for the brain?
Yeah, this is sort of my whole research interest. 10 years ago.
You can answer with your dissertation or not.
Sure. Yeah, I can just now talk for the remaining time that I have, but I'll answer in 2 minutes or under. If you ask me that or ask somebody that a decade ago, they would have said none. But over the last decade, there's been more and more evidence that untreated age-related hearing loss may not be good for the brain and for your health. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. The inner ear has one job, and that's to send a message to your brain. It is connected to the rest of the body through only one thing, the hearing nerve. And that hearing nerve, for all intents and purposes, goes in one direction. It goes towards the brain. It's not completely true, but most of the information is flowing to the brain. And so you could imagine that if the ear didn't work and that signal didn't go to the brain, that might have some downstream consequences on the brain. And the most interesting question, I think, is whether not hearing well in later life affects your cognition, in other words, your intelligence, and whether it might even be a risk factor for developing dementia or dementia symptoms.
And how great is the risk of that?
Yeah, good question. So it's probably related to the amount of hearing loss that you have. There are some studies that show that if you have severe hearing loss, which most people here probably don't have severe hearing loss, that's uncommon. But the risk could be double or triple or even quadruple. The real question is if it's causally related. I hope most people here know there's a difference between association and causation. Just because two things happen together, it doesn't mean that A causes B. So this is what we're trying to figure out now, is whether we can really say that untreated hearing loss causes cognitive impairment. They're surely associated, but we're trying to figure out if it's causally related.
How close is the association? What do we know about how likely it is?
Yeah, we know they go together. So this kind of brings us to the field of epidemiology. This is a whole field of sort of public health that draws connections between health-related things, like is smoking related to lung cancer, which was a great question in the 50s and 60s. And it took a couple decades to answer that question. In the beginning, we thought smoking was good for your lungs. We know for sure that hearing loss and cognitive impairment go together. People who have more hearing loss, they tend to be more cognitively impaired. We're sure of that, but there could be things called confounders that explain the association. So a confounder is a fancy epidemiology word that means something's explaining the relationship between two things. The ultimate confounder is age. So people who are older tend to get hearing loss. People who are older tend to get cognitive impairment. So obviously, hearing loss and cognitive impairment go together, but the real question is, do they happen even taking into account things like age or other confounders? And it seems like they really do go together, even if you take out the effect of age, take out the effect of other things, like, for example, little blood vessel, how do I say? We call it microvascular disease, which is a sort of a way of saying hardening of the arteries. So if your blood vessels aren't as open as they used to be, that might cause hearing loss because then the inner ear isn't getting enough blood supply, and it might cause dementia because the brain is not getting enough blood supply. Even if we take that into account, hearing loss and dementia are still associated. So to answer your question, they seem closely related even when we take into account all of the confounders we can put in the equation.
Well, I didn't know about the effect on the
Microvascular disease. Yeah, that's the second most common cause of dementia, is from blood vessel disease. Basically, Alzheimer's is obviously the most common cause of dementia, but the second most common cause is hardening of little arteries in the brain, and like thousands and hundreds of thousands of vessels not working well, so your brain isn't getting enough nutrient supply, and that takes a hit on how well your brain works.
Is there anything that we can do about that you know of, that
the microvascular disease?
Well, yeah, or progressive hearing loss, for instance.
Yeah, well, two different questions. For the microvascular disease, we've known this for a long time, and I think people here know the answer. You know, don't eat ice cream, exercise, be healthy, do all the things that your mother maybe depending on how old you were, your mother might have told you that eating lard was good for you. But eat all the things you hear on the news, eat broccoli, be healthy. In terms of your hearing, the biggest risk factor for age-related hearing loss is age. So if you can figure out how to stop that risk factor, you'd be a trillionaire. Noise exposure is the second most common risk factor for hearing loss, and it's the most common, we would say, modifiable risk factor, meaning you can't modify your age as far as I checked, but you can modify how much noise you get exposed to. So if you're, going to be around loud sounds, wear earplugs, we tell youngsters. Listen.
Yeah, of course. And before we just get to some other questions, the cost of untreated hearing loss, I've certainly read, is that there are millions of people obviously affected by untreated hearing loss, and the consequences of that in terms of economics are huge. The consequences in terms of social isolation and depression are also huge. Maybe you could address those subjects, though I know, again, that's probably a dissertation.
Yes, sure. Hold on, are we answering questions in the chat? I got distracted by some interesting questions in the chat.
You can go ahead. You can pick one.
Okay, I'll answer your question first, but there are some good ones. Let me just shut this chat window. So I'm not an expert on costs, but I can quote some information you gave me. But the short answer is that it's a very expensive thing because it affects everybody. So the number of people with age-related hearing loss is giant. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's 80% of people over 80, about 2/3 of people over 70. And so it's many dozens and dozens of millions of Americans. And so if you take a huge number and multiply it by a small number, the answer is a huge number. So for example, it's estimated that 15 million people in the US have severe, significant hearing loss. Many, many more have lesser levels, probably 10 times more. And it's estimated that those with the disabling hearing loss, the cost is something like over $100 billion a year, which is a pretty huge number. If you divide that by the number of people with that hearing loss, that would be $91,000 per person, which is
Wow.
which is pretty major.
Wow. There are some comments that I think maybe it'd be a good idea if we answer some of the questions in the chat, and then I can go on and ask you others that I have if they don't. So let's pick up some of these questions. Let's see. Paula asks, does non-age related hearing loss have the same consequences? She said, I have damaged hearing nerve in one ear, good hearing in the other, wondering if this is also might lead to cognitive problems.
Yeah, I think the only relevant variables are when it happens and whether it's 1 or 2 ears, and how bad it is. I think those are the 3 things that matter. The underlying reason for the hearing loss, whether it was caused by a virus or an infection or a hole in the eardrum or aging, I don't think that matters, because as far as the brain is concerned, it's just not getting the sound. It doesn't care whether it was due to a hole in the eardrum or an infection. As an aside, people who are born deaf who sign are profoundly different. So anything I ever say about hearing loss doesn't apply to people who sign, because they don't use spoken language. All of the effects of hearing loss that we hypothesize work through people not being able to communicate well. People who sign communicate with their hands and vision, and so they're like irrelevant. That's a different topic. So we're talking about adults who lose their hearing in adulthood. So the question is, I have damaged hearing in one, damaged hearing nerve in one ear and a good hearing in the other. Will it lead to cognitive problems? If you can hear good in one ear, that's like 80% of it. So you'd be a little handicapped from hearing only on one side, but hearing loss on both sides is much more impactful.
And Karen Mignette asks, hearing loss also, or says, hearing loss also affects mental health and can increase social isolation. No doubt correct about that.
Yeah, I'll just agree.
Yeah. Jan writes that my partner hears sounds at different volume levels, but had difficulty understanding people who don't speak slowly and clearly. They mumble, he says. Are there different kinds of hearing loss?
Yes, there are definitely different kinds of hearing loss, and you can categorize it in different ways. So one way we categorize it is into conductive hearing loss, which is a mechanical problem, things like earwax, a hole in the eardrum, and then the sensory neural, which is by far the most common cause, and that includes age-related hearing loss. So that's one way of categorizing it. Conductive hearing loss never really affects clarity. With a conductive hearing loss, things just need to be louder, and that fixes the problem. So if you have a hole in the eardrum and someone talks louder, you'll hear them loud and clear. You just need to get the sound louder. If you have a sensory neural hearing loss, which is age-related hearing loss and others, it's trickier because it causes 2 issues. One is the volume, sounds become quieter, but the other is the clarity. Things become more distorted and garbled and just not crisp. It would be like smearing Vaseline in your eyes. Things might still be bright, but everything is sort of blurry. Hearing aids, which is really all we have to treat sensory neural hearing loss in 2023, with some rare but interesting exceptions, only fixes the volume problem. So it will make things loud, but it may not make it super clear. And depending on the exact nature of your sensory neural hearing loss, it might be more of a volume problem or more of a clarity problem. I hope that kind of answers it.
Right. So Karen Kuehl asks, I'm curious if EMFs and cell phone affect hearing and the brain.
Yeah, EMF is what, electromagnetic frequency, I assume.
I assume so too.
Yeah, I see you're nodding. Yeah, it's funny. A patient just asked me that 1 hour ago. We don't think it does. The more common question is whether cell phones cause brain cancer or tumors on the hearing nerve. And we're pretty certain the answer to that is no. And just as an anecdote, one reason we really think the answer is no is most people talk on their right ear with the cell phone. And so if cell phones were causing brain tumors or brain cancers, we would have seen that tumors are occurring more on the right side of people's heads, and we've not seen that. So I think that's pretty convincing evidence. But no, there's zero evidence as far as we know that cell phones or EMFs are bad for hearing or the brain. They might be bad for other things, but not that.
Anita Hoffer asks, does hearing loss fluctuate over time in an individual?
Well, the answer is usually not. So most kinds of hearing loss don't fluctuate. Age-related hearing loss absolutely does not fluctuate. It's just a very slow downward stepping. There are some rare causes. Sometimes conductive hearing loss can be fluctuating. So little kids can get liquid under their eardrums and then they need ear tubes. That's an example of a fluctuating hearing loss because they get a cold, they get fluid, they have hearing loss, then it gets better, then they have another cold and they get hearing loss. So, as they go through school, their hearing can go up and down, up and down. But for most people, for most adults, the answer is no. And for sensory neural hearing loss, with some rare exception, it usually doesn't fluctuate.
So Marilyn Howard asks, and this is, I know, really a central part of what I think we want to talk about is the question about, she asks, what about over-the-counter hearing aids? Many of you may know the government finally, after a decade of trying to approve over-the-counter hearing aids in September, and Dr. Golub can speak eloquently on this one.
Yeah, I was actually going to see if I could very quickly put up a slide. It's very simple. People ask me, what is an over-the-counter hearing aid? And it's very simple. We have two kinds of drugs. Over-the-counter drugs, right? You can go to a drugstore, just take the drug and walk over to the register, buy it, go home and use the drug. And then we have prescription drugs that require you to go to a doctor, get a prescription, go to the pharmacy, pick it up, use the drug. Then you need to go back to the doctor to get refills. And the doctor is kind of doing the drug with you, managing the drug with you. Now, in the hearing world, we have the identical scenario. We have two kinds of hearing aids. We have over-the-counter hearing aids, which means you can go to a drugstore, pick up the hearing aid box, walk to the counter, buy it, go home, and immediately start using it. And then we also have prescription hearing aids, which require you to go to not actually a doctor, but an audiologist. Actually, technically, they are doctorates. It's an AUD degree, so they're kind of a doctor, just like an eye doctor can be a doctor without being an MD medical doctor. And they prescribe these things, they get it, they fit it, and then you're working with them the entire time. That might be a little bit of common sense, but every week I have a patient who comes in and asks me if I can prescribe them an over-the-counter hearing aid. I'm like, not everyone in the public understands this. But a little more detail, they're basically sub $1,000 hearing aids that you can program yourself, usually by using a phone. And I say that they're like 75% of the quality at 20% of the cost.
And so the benefit of them is, I guess, mostly okay as long as you have some particular type of hearing loss. I mean, I guess the question is, if you have some hearing loss, there obviously have some value, but should everyone use them?
Right. Great question. It should be helpful for the majority of people who have hearing loss. I mean, basically, the answer is if you have hearing loss, it will work to make sound louder and for you to hear better. That's sort of a universal truth. The concern and why some people opposed it is you don't want people being inappropriately treated with the over-the-counter hearing aids when really they just see a doctor to get the underlying problem fixed. So if you have age-related hearing loss, all you need are hearing aids. In that case, over-the-counter hearing aids are great. Everyone gets better accessibility to these. You can get it quicker, you can get it cheaper, you can always get a more expensive prescription aid later once you're, sorry, somebody's calling me, which hijacked my audio. You can always get a prescription hearing aid later when your hearing loss is more advanced. But the concern is that, for example, if you have impacted earwax, that would be very stupid at an individual and a system level to wear over-the-counter hearing aids for a decade when all you needed was someone to take out earwax. So for every benefit, there's a risk, I guess.
Oh, that's interesting. We have a question from Nancy Chernett, who asked, in your research, are you conducting brain assessment along with measurement of hearing loss? This could be a neuropsych eval, MRI, CAT scan.
Yes, in what I do and what other people do, absolutely. When we say that hearing loss is related to cognition, if you're inquisitive, you may ask, well, how do you measure hearing loss? How do you measure cognition? So hearing loss is measured with an audiogram, and then cognition, or even broader brain health, can be measured with all the things you mentioned, a neuropsych eval, basically like intelligence and cognitive tests, MRIs. Yes.
And Sharon asks, she says, I have tinnitus. I never know whether you're supposed to say tinnitus or tinnitus.
You can say either.
Either, good. Important question answered. I have tinnitus since 1996. It was tested in LA, where they were unable to determine the cause last year. My ENT doctor recommended getting hearing aids soon so that my hearing levels would not become diminished due to the 24/7 continual buzzing. Your thoughts on hearing aids in earlier life?
Yeah, so this is a little off topic, but it's probably the most common thing that patients ask me, so I'm happy to answer it. Tinnitus is usually related to or caused by hearing loss. So when they said in 96 at the house clinic that they didn't know the cause, I'm wondering if there was actually hearing loss then, because usually there's some hearing loss, and then we say hearing loss is the cause. So tinnitus is this very annoying and not well understood thing where the brain makes a phantom sound or ringing sound when it doesn't get enough sound to it. So it's sort of it's due to lack of output from the ear, but the brain is what's making the tinnitus. If you cut the hearing nerve and you disconnect the ear from the brain, you'll have tinnitus. So we know it actually is made in the brain. It's not made in the ear. But the short answer is that hearing aids can help, because the best way to treat the tinnitus is to treat the underlying hearing loss. And in 2023, most causes of hearing loss are going to be treated with hearing aids. So I would just, if you have hearing loss, I would just start with the hearing aid. It's a common sense next step.
Great. And I know when I heard you speak a couple of years ago, you were quite enthusiastic about the range of new hearing aids that were going to be over the counter. I guess Bose is now not itself making, but is behind some other hearing aids. And I think you had mentioned at the time that there were some unique designs coming along. So I would fold into my question, what is the reason that so large a proportion of the population with hearing loss goes untreated? I think 2/3 of people with hearing loss go untreated.
Yeah, depends on the age, but potentially even higher than that. So the answer is it's multifactorial. There are many reasons. So one reason, often the knee-jerk answer, is cost, and that's a big part of it. Prescription hearing aids are very expensive. It's probably at least a couple $1,000s. The best value is probably at Costco. It's still going to be a couple $1,000s. And if you go to a fancy clinic and get top of the line hearing aids, it could be like over $7,000 for a pair of hearing aids. So for a lot of people, they're immediately not going to get hearing aids simply because of the cost. But even in countries where hearing aids are free or subsidized by national healthcare, like in the UK, the wear rates are not much better. I like to give as an example, seatbelts were also free when they came out, but most people didn't wear seatbelts until there was a lot of public health messaging about wearing seatbelts. So cost is one reason. Another obvious reason is stigma. There's this, everyone, I don't have to explain this to you, but there's a sort of association between wearing hearing aids, being old and senile and infirm. And a lot of people who are, younger, older age are not willing to accept that they should be wearing hearing aids and are trying to aesthetically hold off on that for some time. That I think is going to go away. Like the example I love giving when I'm giving a talk over Zoom is I'm right now wearing something in my ear that is more obvious looking than a hearing aid. It's like 10 times more obvious than a hearing aid, yet this thing is cool because it's made by Apple. And so as we see a convergence of hearing aid technology and consumer electronics technology, which is already happening with over-the-counter hearing aids, because companies like Samsung and even eventually Apple are making hearing aids. Apple we can get into later. I think that stigma will go away. So stigma, cost, and then well, those are the two big ones. I'll stop there.
And just out of curiosity, if you start wearing a hearing aid, is there evidence that that's going to slow or stop any neural deterioration?
Yeah, great question. So wearing hearing aids, as far as we know, will have no impact on your ear level hearing. In other words, it won't stop the age-related degeneration of the inner ear, the sort of root cause of age-related hearing loss. That will happen no matter what. Like I wear glasses, but because I have astigmatism, my eyeball is a funny shape, and wearing the glasses has no impact on my astigmatism. As far as I know, I'm not an eye doctor. If there's an ophthalmologist, tell me if that's not true, but that was my understanding. Same thing with hearing aids. But I think it probably is good. In fact, I'm sure it is good for maintaining the hearing abilities of the brain. So the hearing signal, once it leaves the inner ear, it goes into the brainstem, and then it goes up to the temporal lobe, which is the side of the brain where the auditory cortex is. That's kind of like the primary part of your brain that processes sound. And they've done studies that have shown that people who have untreated hearing loss, the temporal lobe will shrink a little compared to people who don't have hearing loss. And so we don't have evidence that wearing hearing aids will prevent that, but it sure as heck makes sense that it would.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess the central processing center also is affected.
Exactly.
Has to do with, I guess, also affects memory when it's
right. This is a great question, and we can get deeper into the whole hearing cognition relationship thing. But the temporal lobe of your brain is connected to other parts of the brain, and so it would make sense that if the temporal lobe isn't working as good as it should, it could have downstream effects on other things, like, for example, cognition.
Yeah, very interesting. We have few more questions piling in. So Paula asks, are there CROS hearing aids in the planning stage over the counter?
Yeah, these are some sophisticated questions for people who don't have standard age-related hearing loss. I think the answer is no. I don't think that will happen because over-the-counter hearing aids are sort of like by design for people with boring, plain, vanilla age-related hearing loss. So let me just explain what a cross hearing aid. A cross hearing aid is for people who are deaf on one side, which is a very special type of hearing loss. So what a cross hearing aid does is one ear can hear fine, one ear is deaf. In the deaf ear, the thing is really just a microphone, and it picks up the sound and plays it into the good ear. So with a cross hearing aid, if someone talks into your deaf side, you'll hear them perfectly on the good ear. It's crossing over the sound. We don't want people who are deaf on one side to just buy hearing aids and just not see a doctor. If you go deaf on one side, we really, really want you to see a doctor because it could be due to something life-threatening like a brain tumor. So we want to make you enter the health system and have to see an audiologist and get a prescription hearing aid, because that's just a more complicated thing. Over-the-counters are kind of designed to be for people who have very simple, straightforward problems, not weird, complicated problems like unilateral, or in other words, single-sided deafness.
Great. Anita Hoffer asks, in this pandemic era, many folks use air purifying HEPA fiber machines, which make a low level white noise. Does this interfere with hearing or have any damaging effect?
Yeah, I'll answer that question, but I actually want to go back to the previous question.
Go ahead. I'm
I think
sorry.
really the desire is probably for a cross hearing aid to not cost like $6,000 or something obscene. So I don't think cross hearing aids will go over the counter, but I'm hopeful that they will become cheaper. Hopefully over the counter hearing aids will drive down the cost of prescription hearing aids. So you'd probably have to get a cross through prescription, but it would end up being the cost of an over the counter hearing aid, not like $6,000.
And over the counter generally are about what, $200?
No more than that. The goal is for them to be sub $500, but they're typically 500 to 1,000 now. But they're new products, so as there's more competition, I think it'll drive down the cost, and then there'll be entry level ones and then fancier ones. So there'll be a lot of choices, basically, just like there is in all sectors of the free market. Like you could buy a cheap car, you could buy $1 million car. So there should be a wide range. So there's something for everyone.
Great. Just before we got some more questions.
Oh, I didn't answer the HEPA question.
Yeah.
The answer is no. So there are charts that show how loud sound needs to be and for what duration you need to be exposed for it to cause hearing loss. So noise-induced hearing loss is caused by basically two variables: how loud sound is and how long you were exposed to it. And those HEPA purifiers, at least the one I have in my house, is quite quiet. You might hear it all the time, but it's designed to be very quiet. I mean, if your HEPA filter was as loud as a loud old vacuum cleaner, and you heard that for 24 hours a day, maybe it could have an effect over a decade.
So before we get to the other questions, should you continue to get hearing tests as you grow older periodically, and what's the periodicity of that? How often should you get them?
Yeah, good question. The answer to this would depend on who you ask, but I personally think that everyone should get a hearing test around 60 when age-related hearing loss on average begins. And it could always serve as a baseline. So if you have more hearing loss in 10 years, you could look back and see what it was when it was minimal. And then probably every 1 to 2 years after that. And if it's been stable for a while, maybe every 3 to 5 years.
And just before I get to Larry's question, one thing I keep asking myself, we're all here advocates for positive aging or concerned with both for ourselves, but our clients. What message or what should we be saying to the public that we know and meet? What's the most important message as age advocates that we should be getting out there?
I would probably say the message would be, don't forget about the value of hearing and the importance of not neglecting hearing loss. Just a simple message like that. Hearing loss is like the elephant in the closet among people who are aging. There are only a few things that everyone gets when they get older, like arthritis, cataracts, hearing loss, maybe a dozen or so things. But you know, there is a finite number of things that happen to older people, but none gets treated as rarely as hearing loss. If you have arthritis, you know, you take Motrin, you do something about it. If you have cataracts, you get your cataracts addressed. If you have high blood pressure, which happens in adults, most people take blood pressure medicine. Hearing loss is unique in being completely neglected and ignored. And if you take a step back, it's bizarre. I mean, why do we all wear glasses for vision loss, but very few people wear hearing aids for hearing loss? And we could talk about all the causes like stigma and cost and everything, but those should be chipped away at, because the bottom line take-home point is that it makes no sense that we don't treat hearing loss, because we treat most other things, most other problems that we have.
Well, so the follow-up question to that is, why doesn't Medicare cover it? Why?
Well,
why
they should. Yeah.
They should.
Yeah,
we
Right.
treat hearing loss in children. If you had a child that was 6, 7, or 8, 9 years old and you saw hearing loss, you'd immediately do everything you could to treat that child. But we don't have the same urgency when it comes to someone who's 60 or 70.
Exactly. Well, I of course completely agree with you. So the from a public health standpoint, the two most important things to get people better access to hearing aids is to create over-the-counter hearing aids so you could have cheap, affordable, super accessible hearing aids to people with mild to moderate hearing loss. And then you need prescription hearing aids for people who have greater levels of hearing loss that really require the expertise of an audiologist because it gets more complicated with extreme hearing loss. That needs to be covered by Medicare. We did the first thing a year ago or 6 months ago. We didn't yet do the second thing. And the answer is it's a political answer. Like, I sure as hell agree with you. There's people on other sides of the political spectrum that don't want Medicare to do anything. But you are correct. I agree.
So maybe it is something for us as advocates to do, which is to do what we can to advocate for Medicare to cover hearing assessments, and I guess Medicare Advantage does in many cases, but straight up Medicare does not.
Correct. And most people have straight up Medicare. With the over-the-counters, that cost is cheaper because you would the request to Medicare would be to cover prescription hearing aids for people with moderately severe and severe hearing loss, because the mild to moderate, it doesn't really need to be covered by Medicare because we have over-the-counters. I mean, it would be nice. I wish they would, but the real gaping hole is the people who have significant hearing loss that need the prescription hearing aids. They're still going to have to shell out $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, which is, for most Americans, that would be the third most expensive purchase in their life after a house and a car.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the explanation of why people go untreated.
Yeah.
So Marilyn, well, first, I guess Larry had a question I saw there. He has surfer's ear and closing of canal. Will a hearing aid help?
Right.
So Larry also circumnavigated the world in a boat. So no doubt he took in a lot of water in that ear.
Yeah. So swimmer's ear is when you get an infection of the outer ear, of the ear canal. Surfer's ear is a less known problem where cold water exposure, particularly early in your life, causes these little bony bumps in your ear to form. We don't really know why. It's idiopathic, but the bone reacts from the cold water by growing. And so you get these little bumps in your ear canal. And if the bumps get big enough, it will actually block the opening of your ear canal, and that will cause a conductive hearing loss. This is the other classification of hearing loss where the sound isn't reaching the inner ear, as opposed to sensory neural hearing loss, which is that the inner ear doesn't work as well. So the answer is you probably could just wear a hearing aid to make the sound louder, as long as it will fit in your ear. If you have really bad surfer's ear, the thing might not get in the ear canal because your ear canal is completely closed shut from the bumps.
Great, thank you. So what about cochlear implants? How effective are they for helping with significant hearing loss? Karen Mignette asks.
Yes, so we basically have 3 levels of devices in 2023. So for mild to moderate hearing loss, we have over-the-counter hearing aids and prescription if you want a premium product. And if you can afford it, absolutely don't get an over-the-counter, get a prescription. They're better, but they're a lot more expensive. And then for moderately severe and some severe hearing loss, we have prescription hearing aids. That's more complicated to program. If they're too loud, it can cause hearing loss. So that really needs to be done through an audiologist as a prescription thing. And then for people who have severe to profound hearing loss, then hearing aids don't work anymore. Their hearing loss is just too bad. And that's a minority of people. Most people will never get to that point. Even if they live to 100, probably more than half of people would not be candidate for a cochlear implant. But a significant fraction of people who are 60 plus would benefit from a cochlear implant. And they're even less utilized than hearing aids. Like if, say, only 30% of people who could get a hearing aid get a hearing aid, that number is even smaller for people with cochlear implants. They're very underutilized. And that's a damn shame because it's analogous sort of to cataract surgery. Most people get cataracts, they have cataract surgery. It's a routine thing. Cochlear implant surgery is a little more involved, a little higher risk, but it's a very routine thing. It takes an hour and a half. I do it. So I'm also an ear surgeon. day job, one of my day jobs. It's a routine thing. It's very reliable at improving hearing. It doesn't give you normal hearing, but it helps tremendously. And I could speak for an hour just about cochlear implants. And Medicare, someone pointed out, yes, Medicare and Medicaid pays for cochlear implants. It's almost always covered.
And as Chris mentioned, it certainly does seem that it would make sense if Medicare provided hearing aids to avoid the greater cost of dementia and supporting older adults.
I mean, this has been proposed. I mean, there's been legislation in the last year or two to get Medicare to cover hearing aids, and it just gets cut out as it goes through Congress. But people are proposing it. It's just people also keep taking it out, so it hasn't got signed into law yet. But it might happen eventually if people are noisy enough.
I mean, the math seems so obvious, and I think I read that it's believed that about 8% of dementias would be avoided. And the cost, there's no magic bullet out there. There's no pharmaceutical silver bullet that would even come close to that at the moment. So
correct.
From every aspect, it seems dumb not to, but.
Well, not all politicians carry the wisdom that people here today carry.
Yeah. So Joyce asked, and we're approaching that we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to, if you'll withstand a couple more questions, Dr. Golub, I don't know if you can or if you have to hop out.
No, I don't actually. I wasn't sure what time this went until I had 5:30 on my calendar. So whatever you want to do. Great.
Well, if you can withstand a few more questions, this has been a lot of interesting questions here. So, so Jan actually comes back and she asks, if the problem is more one of clarity than volume, is there a different type of hearing aid for clarity versus volume?
This is a better question for an audiologist. I like hearing aids. I'm interested in them from a research and a public health standpoint, but the audiologists are really the clinicians that do hearing aids and know all about the different kinds and the modes and the features. So the answer is yes, there probably are some hearing aids that are better at clarity. One strategy to improve clarity is improving what we say the signal over the noise. So typically when you're out in the world and you're having a conversation with someone, there's other noises, right? It's not just only one person speaking and there's absolutely no other sound in the environment. Right now, that's how it is. I'm the only one speaking and everything else is quiet, but this is an ideal listening situation. In the real world, there's almost always background noise, and that's where people have trouble. And so a lot of good hearing aids will try to figure out who is speaking and suppress everything else. And I think actually now with all this artificial intelligence stuff, they can actually make software to try to like pick out which sound waves are the person who would be most likely to be speaking and suppress the other sound waves. So that's one strategy.
Oh, that's really interesting that AI will become a factor in this. That's interesting. So Joyce asked if there was a difference between the $1,600 set at Costco and those charging $6,000 or $7,000. Whether that's
yeah, that's a great question for an audiologist, but the short answer is probably a small difference. I mean, Costco is the best value because they're not $1,600 hearing aids. They're probably like $4,000 hearing aids that they're getting for the ability to sell at $1,600 because it's Costco. So Costco hearing aids are great value. You probably can get more features by paying a premium, but you'll pay triple to get like 1.2 times the quality.
Right. And Jan Zacharias asks, should you go directly to an audiologist for an initial hearing test or to an ENT?
I would probably go directly to an audiologist. First of all, the audiologists are the only ones that can do the hearing test. So the only value the ENT would provide is making sure you don't have earwax, so you can just go get the hearing test. But worst is the audiologist will send you the ENT to get the earwax taken out, and then they'll have you come back to get the hearing test.
Great. Well, I think the last question that I see here, and then we'll just ask if there are any final questions and ask you for your final thoughts, is, I guess, Lois. Arthur asks, has there been any potential treatment for a person who has suffered hearing loss from mumps as a child?
Yeah, well, mumps isn't so much around anymore, but mumps caused sensory neural hearing loss by, I believe it affected the cochlea and the hearing nerve. And so we basically treat all sensory neural hearing loss the same, whether it was due to mumps or age or noise, which is hearing aids. But then there's a second thing that's hearing loss in just one ear. So then as long as you can hear something in that ear, the answer would be a hearing aid in that ear.
Right. So
If you're deaf in that ear, that's a more complicated question. And then you'd have to see me as a patient, do lots of tests so I can tell you what to do.
Great. Oh wait, we did just get into two more questions, it looks like. Well, we got a lot of nice responses. Chris McLeod thanks you, and Norman Reese thanks you, and Karen Mignette says wonderful presentation, and likewise. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of that. It was indeed an informative conversation, and I'm hugely appreciative of knowing how busy you are, that you took the time
Oh, no problem.
to do this with us. I mean, I came away from the Columbia presentation, and again today, with this sense that every one of us as professionals, if we have clients or others, should carry this message, because it's so important. And the likelihood is that we know somebody or we treat somebody who has some hearing loss but doesn't get it checked, and the consequences are so significant that if you knew you were seeing someone, or you had a friend who had a disease that was going untreated, you would shake their shoulders and say you have to go see a doctor. But none of us do that when it comes to hearing. So that's my little soapbox for today. But I just feel so strongly. I think that you're the message that you've been getting out there, and your research on the connection to the potential connection to dementia is so important. And I thank you for your work and for your presentation. And if you have any final thoughts, please.
No, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed, and I particularly enjoyed having a conversation and answering questions, as opposed to doing what I normally do, which is just give a slide presentation. So it was a wonderful break from that to actually have some dialogue. So thank you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. And we wish you everyone here well, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you.